Hello, this is WP Product Talk, the place where every week we interview an experienced WordPress product owner on strategies, tips, experiences, failures, and successes of running successful and thriving WordPress product businesses. I'm Amber Hines of CEO of Equalize Digital.
And I am Zach Katz, founder of Gravity Kit and Trusted Login. And before we introduce today's host, I'd like you all to know about our awesome new website. Check out wpproducttalk.com. It's a great place to see all our videos and find everything we've done.
Today's topic is designing for success, UX principles for WordPress products.
And this topic is great because UX means user experience. So what your users experience, it is your product. It's everything from your website to your social media to your product to your onboarding to your docs. It's your customer service. It's everything. It's so much. I'm excited to dig in today.
Yeah, and I am excited about this topic as well. I'm also excited to introduce our guest, Rich Tabor. I'm going to pop him into the feed. Oh, Zach's got it. Awesome. And Rich, do you want to give a little hello, introduce yourself, and tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. It's great to be here today. Just to kick it off, I'm stoked to chat about the intersection of product and experience today with both of you. But yeah, I'm Rich Tabor, product manager at Automattic, and I'm working on WordPress experience within the site and block editors primarily. I design, I develop, and really I just try to push us towards a more holistic, human-centric experience across the entire project. I'm based a little bit south of Atlanta, Georgia, and I like to travel. I travel all over for Automattic team meetups and WordCamps. We were just at WordCamp US earlier last week. But yeah, that's me and what I do.
Well, welcome. We're glad to have you here.
Yeah, we're super glad to have you here. And for anybody who's watching live, please go ahead and comment on YouTube, and we will see your comments and we will be able to address them live. So please use the chat to ask your questions. So Amber, why is this topic important for WordPress product owners?
Yeah, I think, we talk a lot about user experience on websites and how that helps to convert maybe people to fill out forms or purchase a product. But user experience really can go to anything digital, and that includes software. For WordPress product owners, why we think this is important, I think it could go from stickiness. So if you have a really good experience with your product or your plugin, you're going to have people who are more likely to continue using it. I know we've all probably been there where we've just been looking for something new. We went to WordPress.org, we searched, we installed the plugin, we played around with it for a few minutes, and we were like, I don't understand this, or I can't make it do what I want it to do. And it's not necessarily that the plugin couldn't do that. It's just maybe the experience that users had in that plugin, it didn't guide them to the thing that it could do in the right way. So I think stickiness is really important to consider that. And then of course, I always like to talk usability by a broad user base. And I think UX is very, it's part of or related to accessibility and ensuring that everyone can use your product and use it the way that they need to or want to, or that you intend them to. Rich, do you have thoughts about why WordPress product owners should think about UX?
Yeah, user experience is ultimately, if not one of the main key drivers, it's the key driver of product success. It influences how people perceive and interact with the product and how it plays a central role in shaping, like you said, satisfaction and loyalty. And when you're designing experiences, they're inherently people first. We're designing for people, at least for now. And it's really something to not take lightly when you're developing or designing your first product. People use one phone OS over another almost exclusively because of experience. Because experience is personal and highly subjective. Product is rarely either of those. So where UX and product kind of meld together is defining experiences that appeal to a broad range of people, but are also supplying enough weight for individual preferences to play a big role. And finding that mark for a product owner is paramount to standing out, to making a real impact on what you're trying to achieve, and to get people to actually use the thing.
Yeah, and I feel that coming from a developer standpoint, developers are not the best user experience creators. We like to have things be arranged in certain ways that match our image in our head for what the data structure is. Data structure does not mean user experience. And part of what is hard, I think, for product owners, it might be considering the different users who are using their product and segmenting them, like beginners, intermediate, advanced, but like also uh, technical versus visual learners versus docs readers. Like there are so many different ways that people like to learn and interact with a product, and considering each one of them and making sure that each one of them has a path towards success is uh, is a complicated challenge, and it's why people like Rich can spend their lives on this. So I'd love to.
Can I ask you a follow-up question? I'm going to jump in here just because you mentioned at the beginning that developers are not always super great at user experience or UX. Like they have their idea of what it is. Do you feel like developers, so if someone is a product owner and they come from the background of being a developer, do they need to bring in a designer in order to do that, or is UX something that they can learn?
Rich, I'm going to bounce this to you because I want you to answer the question: are designers good at UX?
I think people can be good at UX. It's a skill like anything else, and it really takes you out of your immediate discipline, and you have to lean into other directions. Like designers have to lean into the expression of their design in whatever environment, whether it's physical in a product like that you hold or that you sit in, or whether it's digital in a product that you use. Otherwise, you can't really understand the nature of what you're building for. And experience is all about that. It's all about knowing what you're building for and who you're building for and why it matters. So I do think that it can be a learned skill, but it is something that you can't just sit down today and have it tomorrow. It is something that you have to continue, just like every other skill we've mentioned, like that you have to continue refining and leaning towards, and passionately leaning forwards towards, in order to make a real difference.
And when you say what you're building for, who you're building for, why it matters, in terms of focusing on like product owners, like let's say a plugin owner, what you're building, who you're building for, why it matters. Can you like break down what that means to you in relationship to a plugin, for example?
Yeah, it comes down to understanding who's using this thing, who's using your product, like who are the people you're trying to build for and who ends up inevitably using it. And what are their needs? Like what are their behaviors? What are their pain points? And figuring out how to approach it with a goal set in mind where you can actually measure success. Like, are you achieving what you're trying to build and meeting those goals and serving those users? Because they all have something that they want to accomplish. You're not buying a phone for any other reason than buying a phone and being able to do everything you can with all these different apps. It's really purposeful in that sense. Or you're buying a car to get somewhere, but you're not buying a car to fly to space, not yet. So it's really understanding the purpose and the intersection of people. As in, that's really how you push product forward into a meaningful direction.
And how do you measure? You say measure success. So for a plugin, or you work on core and stuff, but like, can you tell us more about how you measure success?
Yeah, it gets tricky, especially in an open source environment. It can get very tricky figuring out exactly who those people are and what they're doing. But you almost have to go by what incoming information you're getting. Like we're trying to reach out to customers, being very proactive, really following up and trying to ensure and understand the people.
Uh-oh.
Well, we may have lost Rich. So hopefully he'll pop back in here. You know, what he was starting to say about understanding people, we go off script for just a minute here, Zach. You know, we're recording this or live streaming it right after WordCamp US, and I had posted a question for Matt and Josepha when they were sitting up there that didn't get answered. But I'm going to bump it sort of to you and see if you have thoughts about this, because I think it kind of relates to product, and maybe we can chat about it while he comes, and UX. And he was talking about understanding the people. And one of the things I've thought that is a challenge in WordPress is balancing the needs of the enterprise users of WordPress with the more DIY bloggers of WordPress, and trying to figure out, how you balance that. And I think this comes up with plugins as well. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this or you have any thoughts on it.
Honestly, I don't try to optimize for enterprise because well, I have reasons, but they're probably not good reasons. Oh, Rich is back with us. Rich, Amber asked me about whether or not, like, how we address enterprise markets when we're doing user experience, like when we're focusing on user experience. I figure enterprise have enough people that they can kind of figure things out themselves and write internal documentation for how they need to use it. And enterprise demands are so far removed from our daily interactions with customers. Like, we rarely interact with enterprise customers because they have their own internal support solutions that we aren't even privy to or part of. So when it comes to humanizing our design, we focus on the feedback that we hear customers have. And honestly, the feedback that I have when I set up my own product and I'm like, oh, this part is very frustrating or unclear. How can we make this better to reduce the number of steps, to increase the obviousness of the next step that we're taking?
Yeah.
Rich, what do you recommend for like optimizing for enterprise versus for everyone else, or are they all the same?
Or just
are they all the same experience?
Yeah, you were speaking a little bit about different user groups as you jumped off, and that's sort of where I went with that, because I think it's hard to know as a product owner where to focus your efforts sometimes, I think, and different user groups have very different needs sometimes, even within the exact same product.
Yeah, and especially in the WordPress plugin space, a lot of times folks will launch something and then it kind of changes direction on its own in a sense. Like, you might find that that your user base ends up being more enterprise level, or leaning into that direction where you had intended to build something simpler. And that's just a case of in a sense of following where the product is going. And then if you start fitting into that market, start asking lots of questions, reach out to them, like be very proactive. And that's something developers can really improve on, is just really getting out there and talking, and like setting meetings, like getting face to face with some of these high value clients, especially on the enterprise level, and figure out what they're using. You might not build like specifically for this one client, but you might notice like 5 or 6 things that are like, hey, these are really interesting that I could probably see if our other enterprise clients also could find use in this. And that could start helping to guide where you're going with your product.
Rich, we have a viewer named Paul who asks, how to keep interface simple regardless of user type?
That's a very good question. Simple is a hard word. I lean
deceptively
towards,
simple.
Right. I lean towards intuitive rather than simplicity. And something that's intuitive can be different for individuals. It might be very complex for someone who has a lot of complex knowledge. With Figma can be very complex if you know how to leverage it that way. But it can also be more simple if it's locked down or reduced in some of the UI efforts. I think that there's an avenue for that sort of personalized experience on the product side, where perhaps there's probably not role-based, but maybe there is some sort of like level of mechanism that makes WordPress simpler or more intuitive for folks who need that or require that experience. Or you can sort of unlock progressively more advanced features or functionality, or different admin pages. There's just more that you can kind of spread out of. I think that's something that not many folks have explored. in WordPress specifically, but the progression of features could be something worth exploring.
This is something we've talked about a lot in our product. And I know we're maybe going to shift into personal stories a little bit, but we've talked a lot about utilizing core user roles and unlocking different capabilities or reports in Accessibility Checker, because there's things we might flag as an accessibility problem in the header, but if a user is just an author, they don't have access to edit anything in the header. And so that just becomes noise to them. And so I do think there are ways when you're building a product specifically for WordPress that you can utilize some of that, what already exists in core, to maybe build, like you were saying, unlocking certain features or unveiling certain information or providing user role specific experiences within a product. Should we shift over to that and share some personal experiences with product UX, either successes or failures or things that we think product owners can learn from? Do you want to go first, Rich? Do you have a story you want to share?
Yeah, I've been, I don't know, subconsciously dropping hints about cars and space and all this stuff. But something that's been really inspiring me lately is the idea of Tesla. We take Tesla cars, we take the idea of a car and make it as simple as an experience as possible, like for like a very, almost generic in a sense way, where you sit into a car and you're ready to go, and you get to where you're going, you hit the park, and then you just get out. Like, how do you take something so complicated like a car and distill it down to the most simplest functions and make that holistic experience feel very intuitive across a broad range of people? That to me is a very, very challenging and a huge ask that Tesla seems to be on the track of. And I find that very, very, very interesting, especially as we look at WordPress. WordPress is also very huge, very, very challenging. There's lots of different pieces, just like a car traditionally is. But trying to make WordPress feel as intuitive and as holistic as an experience as Tesla is doing with cars. I think it could be very interesting if you installed plugins and you had confidence that they were going to work together. That's kind of the nature of where Gutenberg promised where that we're going to go and where we're getting to, where you can add plugins and add blocks and use themes, and they're all interoperable and work together. And I think that's still the grand vision for sure. And we're like on that path, and I'm just really stoked to keep leaning in on that direction.
Even beyond getting in the car, from the very moment you go to Tesla.com, it's a different experience for shopping for a car. You don't go to a dealership, or you can, they have dealerships or whatever, but you can buy the car as if you're buying an iPod, or I'm old. I meant to say iPhone. You can just go and buy the car. The configurator is simple. You don't have like financing options as complicated as normal. It's all like their own in-house financing, or pay by credit card, or pay by Bitcoin. You just buy it like a product in your cart, and then you either pick it up or whatever the next step is. But like, you go there, you get in the car, you pair it with your phone, you start driving. Rich, you said you have to put it in park and get out of the car. You can just get out of the car and it puts itself in park.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious on that. Like, we talk about this making it easy for users. Where do we feel like onboarding wizards fit in this creating a good user experience? We might have lost Rich again, but we can talk about onboarding wizards. I don't have one. I've been thinking I need one. Do you have onboarding wizard in your product, Zach?
We are in the process of building one. After 9 years of wanting one, we're finally building one. And the first step is that Casey, our marketing and content lead, he went through each of the steps that a user would go through and identified questions. Hi. Amber asked whether or not we have onboarding processes for Gravity View and Gravity Kit products, and
like an onboarding wizard.
An onboarding wizard. And we are finally doing it. And part of the experience that we went through is hiring UX ATT, which they're designers that a designer, user experience specialist, accessibility specialist, and they went through each of our processes that you go from installing the plugin to configuring your first view. And they identified where they felt good and where they felt uncertain, and they added notes. And they did like a visual timeline for going from the beginning of buying and installing the product all the way to successful configuration. And they broke it down into each step, and I found that extremely enlightening and very helpful to know just how many steps there are and how complicated it must feel for customers. And like every single step is a point of people getting frustrated, getting lost in the process, giving up. And every single one of those steps is a huge friction point that we can work to reduce. And the onboarding is kind of, I feel like it's a patch. It's not like it's not a good fix to some core user interface problems that we have, but it at least helps guide people and has a signpost saying like, here, you're going to be able to get to this next step, and we can guide you there.
Yeah, I know in our experience, having that outside person come in and give feedback, like you hired UX ATT, is that the company? We've also done this with, well, with ours, we do user testing with blind users on our plugin too, and in our plugin admin screens too. But we've also just had like some customer calls, and we've sent out messages and asked, if anybody would fill out, this was a couple of years ago when we first launched it, a survey to try and help us get feedback and figure out what features they wanted. And then we asked, like, would anyone be willing to get on a call? And our customers, we had several who were just offered to get on calls with us. We didn't compensate them or anything, and they gave us a ton of great feedback. But I think you're right. Like, you have to sometimes get out of your own head, because you're like, well, I understand how this works. But then in reality, it might not be as easy as you think it is. I mean, I still don't know. I don't know, Rich, if you have any thoughts. I played around with a 2023 and I made a site for the first time with that. I'm way behind the times on full site editing. It took me like 40 minutes to figure out how to set up the navigation menus. And I have been using WordPress since 2008. And I was just like, it took me forever to figure that whole thing out. And it is interesting. Like, sometimes when we build something, we think it's intuitive, but it's not.
Yeah, I would say, especially the three of us, we've been in WordPress for so long, we're incredibly biased. Like we really can't trust our judgment when we're like, oh yeah, this is simple. Like, sure, it's simple if you have, the 10 years of knowledge behind you. Like, even, it's just, you can't rely on that at all. It is really about, like you said, Amber, and Zach, like getting folks in front of this who haven't seen it before. Like, a lot of times I'll have like a quick video that that I share around, and then I take it to, even my wife is a little biased because she's been with me for all this time, but just showing her what I've been building. I'm like, what do you think of this? And sometimes she's like, I have no idea what that is. I'm like, okay, if you don't even know, then I think we're already missing the mark. So really leaning in on testing and getting it in front of folks is incredibly important. I think for onboarding and like setting up something is nice. It's really hard to get that right across such a wide range of people and websites in WordPress. But I do think that we can lean in on like walkthrough or teachable moments in the interface that really help you understand a little bit better. We have a couple new user experiences in WordPress, but they're all very, just click next and read the small paragraph. It doesn't, I think we can really level up to help introduce some of these editing concepts, especially in WordPress. And I think that could go a good ways in moving WordPress into that more intuitive layer.
So one thing WordPress does for major releases is when you update, it redirects you to like a landing page that says what's new. That's, very stylized and highlights features. Most of us product owners don't do anything like that. We have our, release notes that somebody could see before they hit the update button. And I'm assuming most users, except for maybe developers, don't even read those, right? Do you feel like that would be a feature or something that product owners should start to think about doing? Like this release is out, they hit update, and then it redirects them after the update to a success page telling them what's new. Would that be helpful?
Potentially, maybe. I don't know exactly what the implementation should be, but I do think if we had some sort of systematic approach where plugin authors could say, like, these are the 4 things, the big highlights in my next release, and WordPress would every plugin would have some sort of way to communicate that in the same fashion. It could be interesting. Like when iOS Notes gets a new update with a new release, you'll see 3 bullet points, and they'll have an image and heading, learn more type stuff. Like if we had some way that
consistent,
right, it's consistent, it's expected. That way, every time a plugin updates, you could see these are the few interesting things about it, and you can lean in those directions instead of having. I don't know about redirects to everything different. I think that could be perhaps more confusing. Yeah.
And you talk about consistency and simplicity. Well, not simplicity, but the other word that you used,
intuitiveness.
Intuitiveness. Yeah, and I think I'd love to hear more about how you see those fitting into the WordPress 6.3 design changes. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about what product owners specifically could kind of, what your vision of the WordPress admin is in the future. Because it's not, I went to WordCamp US and I heard somebody asked about Matt's opinion on design, and he responded, yeah, I'm thinking that we need clearer labels. And I'm like, yeah, that's not exactly what the question was about. So can you give any further insights into where you feel WordPress is heading in design, language, and experience?
Yeah, I think I'm pretty confident we're leaning towards consistency, building, even at the component level. If we could, and this is something that needs to be worked on. It was one of the topics talked at the community summit. Is leaning into building out common UX patterns and having those expectations clearly defined. So if your plugin's going to do X, this is how you do it. For example, the updates that we just talked about, that could be one of those. If you want to show updates, this is a mechanism for that. And we also all agree that this is highly accessible, that this is following all the design standards within WordPress. And let's document that and move it forward to the next item on the list. Leaning in on component libraries, and especially we already have Figma components that we're trying to maintain with the WordPress design library, but extending that further into dev and then extending that further into an accessibility first approach will help push things towards consistency, because we want an experience where you expect what happens. You're not surprised every time you try to do something new in WordPress. It should be very, very common, very intuitive, and we're definitely going that direction. It's a lot of heavy lifting to move there.
Yeah, I think one thing that product owners should probably think pretty seriously about is the customization of their setting screens. I know we've personally erred on the side of we're not going to do a ton of fancy styling for those. They're going to just, if it's an input, it looks like a WordPress input anywhere else. I think it's important that it matches, because how our product integrates with WordPress as a whole, as a product owner, impacts the overall user experience within the content management system as a whole. And if your product feels very distinct or separate from it, I think that that's a bad thing. I don't think that's a good thing.
I don't
know if you all
a
have
different
thoughts about
opinion
that,
of that.
Okay, go.
The WordPress input, the WordPress settings default form table is pretty basic, and I feel like it's a hindrance to customers who have grown up on iOS, for example, and know what a toggle looks like, and they don't maybe have the same feeling about a tiny little radio button versus a big chunky toggle that is easier for touch interfaces, for example, maybe, or I don't know. I feel like a more modern looking interface might be easier for customers, even if it is not exactly what your general settings looks like in WordPress.
Yeah, I lean in support of both concepts. So I do think a more modern approach to building admin views in WordPress, using WordPress components that we're already refining in the block inspector and we're trying to leverage on the Gutenberg side, like pulling those out to be built by building admin pages with those will improve the experience, because we'll have the same edit controls as you do admin controls. It doesn't feel, it's more intuitive. Once you learn it, you know it. I think leaning in that direction is important. At the same time, one of my early explorations with blocks was co-blocks, and it was very important to make it look and feel like every other WordPress block than core, because you don't want to surprise folks. You don't want them to wonder, like, why does this placeholder look totally different than any others? Does it work the same? I don't know. Like, I have to try and learn it now. So there is a balance on both, but I think we can get to a level of consistency where developers are building experiences and admin views with the same WordPress components that can then also potentially be styled. Like, say your plugin could use like a dark blue accent color instead of the standard background color on the page, and maybe we have a theming mechanism set up in core to where we ensure that it meets accessibility guidelines based on the one color scheme. Maybe there's ways to push forward, but also maintain that consistency. Just like iOS or Android, with some of the apps that use consistent color palettes, but then maybe one color is changed. Like in the music app or the notes app, there's the pink and the yellow, so it's clearly identified, but they both feel the same.
Yeah. So I know you said there were some conversations about this on the community summit, and there are some components. If product owners wanted to learn more or get involved with some of these initiatives on the WordPress side, where would they go? Is there a specific Slack channel for this?
I would say on the design front, there's the design Slack channel. And then on the Make Core and Make Design blogs, there's a couple of explorations on how this could work. The theming mechanism, I think, is just got introduced yesterday, I believe, or the day before. And I know there's a PR working right now to explore and see how that could work and how it could be leveraged. But all of these are, actively in flight, and which is really interesting, because it's a great time to get in early and say, like, hey, let's help establish what this should look like together, so that we can all leverage this system instead of building, systems for every different plugin. It would start to feel more cohesive. So yeah, I would encourage folks to jump in on the Make Core and Make Design blogs, and or ping me on Twitter, and I can help point you as well.
Yeah, we have a couple of people we could just say. So Katie, one of our co-hosts, she said she agrees everything should look like native WordPress, but when they add extra stuff to their settings pages, they try to be, quote, inspired by WordPress, even if it's bespoke. And you may have answered this, but I think Paul also had a comment wondering, do you think the new admin will provide a consistent UX+ design approach for plugins to use? So you were sort of saying that's in progress. Do you have any sort of timeline on that?
I don't want to get connected to a timeline, but we do have
right here. You heard it on WP Product Talk.
Breaking news, yeah.
Yes, we do have WordPress components already in the Gutenberg project that you can expose and you can use, and some folks are already doing that. There needs to be, like Paul also mentioned, like something like some consistent design language guide, like a human interface guidelines material, and that would be very helpful. And that's what I mentioned earlier about trying to bring together design, development, and accessibility into one. Like, this is how we do this one thing guide, and I think that would be very paramount to helping encourage and also teach developers and improve the development experience in WordPress for building, especially on the new admin.
And in the meantime, until we have that handbook, what resources do you have for product owners who might have a designer who on staff, or who don't have a designer and need to learn this all themselves? Do you have any of your favorite resources that we could share?
Yes, we have the WordPress design library on Figma, and that's where all the visuals are for all the components that we already have built. And in Gutenberg, we have the components directory, and you can leverage those and start experimenting, see what's there. And also, if there's something on the accessibility front that we should improve on the component side, like at the smallest level, like, let's get that noticed and let's get that in now, so that by the time we start building full-fledged admin views, we have a lot of those in place. I think that that's very important. So starting to play with it and experiment, there's we can add the link, but there's a storybook which helps you visualize them all, like right there, and see what props are available on the developer side for them. And also just starting to raise awareness, like, hey, we built this bespoke component because X and Y weren't available, or maybe this one component could be tweaked just a little bit, and here's how others could leverage it, so that you're not just pitching it for how you would leverage it, but how it could be it could be built with by a lot of other product owners.
And what about on a broader like UI, UX, like a user journey type of thing? Do you have your favorite resources for that for people to learn more?
I mean, I learned best by diving in. So like the Figma was my like what's what place. And as a that's the designer me, is like I need to see it and feel it and drag components around and see like, okay, like this is how we can quickly prototype ideas that can be leveraged in the editor. So that's where I would start.
And do you prototype with people, like with the actual interactive elements where people can click through and go to the next screen?
Both. It depends. It depends on how fast. If it's an idea that's kind of solid and it's like, hey, let me just put something together to push to development, then I might just plug it together. Otherwise, you can build with the actual components and really play around, make a draft PR, and just start working on it.
And Amber, we haven't gotten to your story time. I'd love to hear your own personal experience with user experience.
My own personal experience with the user experience. Well, so I mentioned a little bit my personal experience with challenges with building a nav menu. I think I've also I had some challenges occasionally, like I mentioned, with other plugins, installing them, being able to figure it out, and just being like, I'm going to uninstall this. In our plugin, we have worked. So we recently released a front end view. We call it front end highlighting internally for going through accessibility problems on websites, and that really came out of our plugin is used on the new NASA website. And for anyone who hasn't seen it, on the back end, on the post, it has a view where it flags accessibility problems and it shows code snippets. And there's a lot of users that don't know what to do with an HTML block of code. Even something that some of us might think is basic, like H2 with some words inside it. They're like, I don't know what this is. And so we got a lot of feedback that they're like, this is a cool plugin, but most of our content creators don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to figure out where the problem is. And so for us, we had to spend time figuring out what is the experience that a non-technical user who is interested in accessibility and wants to make sure their content is accessibility, what can we do? What can we do? And so we ended up deciding, we aren't yet, like, we're going to get to a point where maybe we can jump them to the element in the block editor, but because we scan the whole page and not just the content, it sometimes is more challenging. So we ended up creating a link view on page that for each issue, when you click it, it will load in a new tab, the front end of the website, scroll to the element, highlight it with a pink box, and open up something that explains a little bit more about what the problem is and how to fix it in sort of like a modal. I think we'll be iterating on it, but that was our attempt at trying to create something that was easier for a non-technical user, and it came out of a lot of conversations with those users. So I think we've gotten positive feedback on it, so I do think it is helpful. I think we'll probably continue to refine it, and maybe that's the case with UX always, like it's never done. You're constantly tweaking and improving and trying to figure out how to make things easier for people. I know one of the things that we want to do, like you've done, Zach, is going through and figuring out what that initial setup is, because I do think not having that onboarding wizard or something to get people started is an area where we could definitely improve in our product. So I wonder if we want to switch gears and talk about our best advice, because we're almost at the end of the show. Do you want to start, Zach?
I do. And my best advice is to get started. And how do you get started? For me, the book that really opened my eyes to this, to user experience overall, was a book called "Don't Make Me Think" by Steve Krug, and it is a brilliant book. It's like a picture book almost, where you can clearly see how complicated everyday life is and how simplifying it for the user uh, benefits everybody, including accessibility, including developers. Like everybody wins when things are clear, how to go from step A to step B. And I bought it 15 years ago when I started my web design business, and it still serves me well today. So I highly recommend Don't Make Me Think, which is now Don't Make Me Think Revisited. Check it out. It's an incredible resource.
Yeah, so my top advice is to do user testing and customer interviews. We talked about this a little bit more, so I won't go too in depth, but I do think that getting out of your own head or your own space and getting feedback from people who use your product is really invaluable. And that's going to point out both bugs that you can improve, but also features. We've had things where someone said things in an interview that they were like, we really like this aspect of the plugin or the way that they were using it that we didn't even think of. And so I highly recommend talking to your customers, whether it's through a survey or setting up Zoom calls with them, getting feedback. If you can hire people to test, like Zach did, or people with disabilities, I highly recommend that.
And even if you're just totally afraid of reaching out to your customers, which I understand sometimes it's scary, you can hire people on usertesting.com, and they will record themselves and speak out loud while they're testing. And that's all you really need is anybody, especially your users, but like literally anybody, to record themselves while they're using your product. It will reveal a ton of stuff.
What
How about
tips do you
you?
have, Rich?
I already mentioned, understanding your people and what their needs and behaviors are. But I would say second to that, WordPress is a very interesting ecosystem to build in, and I wouldn't build in a silo. I would get whatever I'm working on in front of people. That's the beauty of open source. It's that we can push out ideas and get feedback from people of all walks of life and all sorts of abilities from all over the world. Like it's this really, I don't know, cliche, magical way that people can work together and build beautiful products and experiences. And I'm more encouraged than ever that that we're even talking about the UX principles for WordPress and how we can lean into making this more intuitive and more friendly for everyone. And I think that as a community, we're going to continue evolving in this direction and to build these holistic experiences. But yeah, don't build in a silo. Like, get it out there and get some feedback.
It's a good point because we live in a world where it's not like we get to have input on what Gmail looks like, but we have input on what WordPress looks like, and
Yes.
that's incredible.
Well, and there's great communities out here. I mean, that is one of the things that I've loved so much about WordPress. Share a screenshot. There's different Facebook groups. There's post status, which a lot of us are in, Twitter, or X or whatever we're calling it these days. I've, posted out a screenshot and been like, what do you think of this? And I get really helpful feedback. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about WordPress that maybe doesn't exist in some other ecosystems.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Rich. Thank you so much for this conversation. It's been a pleasure. Next week on WP Product Talk, we have our co-hosts Matt and Katie are going to be talking with special guest Travis Tots, brand and marketing director of Gravity Forums. So join us for that next week at the same time, Wednesday at noon Eastern.
And
Awesome.
that special thanks to Post Status, who I just mentioned a minute ago. They are our green room where we prep for all of these. So thank you. If you are enjoying these shows, please do us a favor, hit like on the YouTube video, subscribe, share it with your friends, add us into your newsletters if you have a newsletter that goes out. And most of all, come back next week. Thanks so much.